Hey, everyone. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers coaching search is starting to percolate. Where should they be looking? We'll talk about it next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcasts, it's always free and never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 24,000 subscribers to the channel, all of whom, Andy, are starting to do deep dives, jump down any rabbit hole they possibly can to find out about assistant coaches that they might never have heard of 4 days ago, because that's where we are at this point. There's a secret guy sitting on the end of the bench in Charlotte the Lakers needed put their hooks into, Andy, because he's the next Phil Jackson. Something like that. I'm doing that. I'm not making fun of people. I'm doing the same thing.
I'm guessing it's not Charlotte.
Probably not Charlotte.
I'm gonna, just for the sake of expediency and try to make my research as productive and efficient as possible. I want no part of anybody who's been on Charlotte's bench.
It's one of those things where they say the cliche, Andy, is it's always the place you least suspect, unless it's Charlotte.
If the place is Charlotte, I'm just going to allow this mystery to go unsolved.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Talk a little bit about later in the show about some of the reaction that we got to yesterday's show about accountability. And there's still some people on there who think people are just not being fair to Darvin, or that we focus too much on Jeannie and Rob Pelinka and didn't focus enough on LeBron. And as we like to, as the inventors, Andy, of the blame pie, we do like to point out there's enough to go around. So we'll try to get to that. Please keep leaving questions and comments. But as we start to get into the meat of this coaching search, and we learned on Monday, for example, that Jason Kidd signed an extension with the Dallas Mavericks, making it that much less likely that he's going to be the next Lakers head coach.
Could be an extend and trade.
Right. Does that happen with coaches?
Well, I mean, Doc Rivers did get traded.
That's true.
So, maybe it's Jason Kidd plus Jason Kidd and I don't know, some second round pick for D'Angelo Russell and 3 firsts. Who says no?
Like it's like a pick swap.
Yeah.
I'm still, you see chatter about no, the Lakers really can get Ty Lue. And I'd like to remind people that even if Lue was super duper upset with the Clippers, really hated it there, and just decided, there is no indication that he is, by the way. All the reporting says that he would like to stay with the Clippers or whatever. While Steve Ballmer
and Lawrence Frank, by the way, during media availability for the Clippers today, went on record very, very strongly, quote, Ty had a terrific year. Our hope is that Ty is the LA Clippers coach for a long time. Later noted how Ty Lue is really good at being honest with players without alienating them in the process. Like they went very, very hard towards we want to keep this guy around for a while. I will say, I do think this has been prompted, at least a little bit in part, by the Lakers' reported interest in this. If I'm a coach around the league and I got 1 year left on my deal, I'm starting a rumor that the Lakers are interested in me, because that is the best way to get locked up.
Who called me today?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just funny because Steve Ballmer, while he can't offer Ty Lue all the money in the world to stay, he can offer most of it. Technically he doesn't have all the money, but he's got a significant portion of it. And he'll just to keep him from coming to the Lakers would put up some astronomical number, because they're not moving into that building this year and watching and leaving Ty behind. No, he's coming with,
Especially if they don't even know if they got Paul George coming with them or James Harden.
They are 100% bringing Ty Lue with them.
Like, all they know right now is they got Kawhi Leonard locked up, and they don't even know when he's going to be available. Damn right they're keeping Ty Lue. He might suit up. He might be a player coach.
So they have to make some decisions about Russ. It opens up a roster spot. It is interesting though, because this process, what kind of coach are they looking for? Because Mike Budenholzer is a different guy than Terry Stotts, who's a different guy than JJ Redick would probably be, and a different profile than David Adelman and all these other guys. And first and foremost, I think it gets to the question that I know you love to ask, which is, I think, and for me, there's two parts of it. It's, what do you want out of the coach? I know that's something you've been banging on for, I don't know, about 12 years now. And the second part of that is, what kind of identity do we want as a team? How do we want to play? What kind of roster do we want to put together? What kind of style do we want to have? What kind of ethos do we, like Golden State, even when it hasn't worked, has had an ethos about how they want to play. And granted, it's all under one coach, but that transfers through everything that you do as an organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. The last couple coaches that they've had, Frank Vogel at times seemed to want to go bigger than the talent on the roster would dictate. And Darvin Ham has often wanted to go smaller than the talent on the roster would dictate. And how much of that is, Rob Pelinka's vision of building a roster butting up against what either Vogel and or Ham wanted to do, versus these were the players that we could get. And to some degree, Pelinka has to be thinking about the best way to fit the vision of these coaches, but the coaches also have to recognize that you can't jam a square peg into a round hole. On some level, you have to be willing to adjust your vision to reality and try to meet those, utopian version of what the basketball would look like with reality, what's on the roster, try to find a middle point that excels.
Yeah. And I think to be fair to Darvin, the ability to play in the way that Lakers theoretically were built to play on paper, the way we talked about how they probably would play coming out of camp, which was big, was limited, particularly in the second half of the season, because two of their bigs weren't available.
Sure, but there were disinclinations to go bigger last year as well. I mean, it's a thing.
And, right, no question. And
in the same way, Vogel loves to go big, even when he doesn't have the pieces for it.
And right, and the Lakers, there were, especially with Frank, it seemed like Rob was periodically aggressively trying to build a roster that Frank wouldn't like, getting rid of pieces that were stronger defensively, and all these other things. And, not having that vision of whatever, it's like everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction. But like, this is what I find intriguing about this coaching search. Like, let's say independently, you could rank the 10 guys who are going to appear on the Lakers list, 1 through 10. You might objectively have Budenholzer at 1 and Stotts at 2, and you start to create these tiers of coaches based on whether it's talent, the perceived upside, whatever it might be. But I also wonder, Andy, if the Lakers are thinking about this in terms of continuity. Like, if we decide how we want to play, then the 5th best coach on this list theoretically might be our best coach, because he's best for what we want to do with the roster we currently have, with the ethos that we want to carry forward. And if that guy's not available, you might want to go to the 8th best guy, because that's the next closest approximation. I wonder if I hope they have figured out those types of things, so they don't ping pong back around to every other type of approach. And at the very least, you can start to try to build a roster that year in and year out is building towards the same thing.
All right, when we come back, there's a couple thoughts I have about that even if I don't disagree with what you're saying, I think could make the way you're framing this complicated. So get into it coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get things that are bothering us off our chests, big or small. These items can really just get to you. These things that are just nagging you, building up in your head. It's important to let them out and have that sounding board who is unbiased in your life. And we do this show, Locked On Lakers, that we hope is a really nice escape from real life for our listeners, for our viewers. We all love the Lakers, and we hope this is a stress release, a time that you can just forget about real life during this show. But at the same time, I don't care how much you love the Lakers. Everybody has more pressing issues in their life than how the team is doing. And again, we all need the avenues for dealing with those issues. And it can be huge to talk with a professional. I can speak to how much therapy helped me and my family during a really difficult period in our lives. And if you are thinking about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So what I think is interesting about the way you're framing this, Brian, is the idea of finding that coach that fits your vision of the roster and tailoring your decision, whoever you hire next.
Not even so much the vision of your roster exactly. I mean, it's obviously important. You got to have a guy because you can't overhaul everything, particularly, the Lakers are built around LeBron and AD. First and foremost, you need to have a plan on how you want to maximize LeBron and AD. But there are, multiple ways to do it. I mean more like, do you have a vision of what kind of basketball you want to play? Because not every coach views it the same way. And what style, if you had a perfect world, how you want it. It's not just the roster, it's also kind of your ethos. But yeah, I just to clarify, I mean, just more for other people if I didn't explain it well initially.
No, that's basically what I thought you meant. But what I think is going to be interesting about that is first the idea that the roster may very well be in flux. So to some degree, no matter how much you interview with these candidates, bring them in a second time, a third time, there's going to be a bit of a dice roll because you don't know exactly who's going to be on the roster and then how the coach can go about implementing them towards what is hopefully a shared vision between the coach and the front office. But the other thing that I think is interesting about this, when you mentioned like the idea of maybe the fifth best guy on your list might be the best fit for how you'd want to play. And if that guy wasn't available for whatever reason, the eighth best guy. What I think is really interesting about that framing is when you look at the candidates that are generally rumored to be out there linked to the Lakers, there's nobody that stands out as the obvious,
the second best, the third best, no question.
There are some names that I think are intriguing. There are some names that I think just sound solid choices. You know what you're getting in, say, Terry Stotts. Like there should be very few surprises with that. There are the JJ Redicks of the world, which I have no idea what the hell that's going to be, but that is an interesting, frankly, very ballsy call. But all of the names that are out there, the big thing that jumped out at me is I have no idea how I would rank them, and nobody feels like a consensus front runner or an obvious front runner, which on one hand could make this complicated for a front office that and an organization that I've said many, many, many times, I don't think knows what they want in a coach because I don't think they think the coach is that important. But I guess on the flip side, it may force them to do more homework because there's not an obvious choice out there.
And this is where it's tricky because, like the beauty of Pop, for example, is if you look over the years as to how the Spurs have played and how they've won, it's changed. It has evolved in different times, different places. They win with offense, they win with defense, they win with bigs, they win. Obviously now they're rebuilding and all that kind of stuff. But there's a flexibility in the how with somebody like Pop of course, we're talking about the best coach of, arguably the best coach of all time. Certainly, up there in the ultra elite group. And this is where, like, we talk about it with players. The right role player on the right team. Aaron Gordon went from a pretty good player in Orlando, like a nice player, but like everybody, you can't win with it, like all, to a like, it's hard to think of somebody who fits better with their role, has become more elevated, more instrumental in winning and all these other things than what he does in Denver.
Andre Iguodala with the Warriors several years ago.
Exactly. There are certain guys that when they are imperfect, but if you put them contextually in the right spot, become brilliant. And I think the coaches that the Lakers have to choose from are probably most NBA coaches are like this. It's actually, it's sort of one of the things that disappointed me a little bit about Darvin this year was I kind of felt like he missed that bar where, like, if you gave Frank a good roster and you got good results. You gave, Darvin in year one, like, he had a completely incoherent roster and actually squeezed some pretty decent results just in keeping the group together. And then when the roster got better, lo and behold, their record got better. And then they had that nice run. This year, they didn't get that. Like, he didn't, he had a better roster with the injuries, I get whatever, throwing on a better.
To be fair to Darvin, they had a better record. It's not like the season was trash, but it felt like he did not capitalize as much on what he had in front of him the way he could, because he was getting in his own way. And as a result, it led to the Lakers, if nothing else, having a harder draw in the playoffs to begin than maybe they should have had, even if you don't think ultimately they were good enough to win a championship, which
better
I
coaching,
don't think they were.
I think better coaching would have been worth 5 games for them this year. I think overall, in terms of when they would have started doing things and how they would have, and just the continuity that and the communication, accountability, all these things that led to, generally speaking, them kind of losing confidence in their head coach. If that doesn't happen, I think they're 3 or 4 or 5 games better, which puts them in a 6 seed. And there's a huge difference between 6 and 8. And having to play in the plan and having to make sure you make that push the entire way through. It's a big difference.
Well, they might lose to the Wolves anyway. The Wolves look really good.
They might, and this is a separate problem with the Western Conference.
Yes, it is.
But
yes, it is.
They do not have, because the Lakers. I think this gets to something you talk about a lot. When the Lakers have obvious choices that require them to go do Lakers stuff, we're going to go get LeBron James. We're going to go get Anthony Davis. We're just going to do that because we have the capital. We've done it. Like, people want to come here and we're going to get it done. Where the Lakers struggle, as do other teams, but where the Lakers struggle is when the choice isn't so obvious. And I think they try to. This is why the Ty Lue rumor was, because he's the obvious guy that if you could get him, like, you can create it. Like, well, sure. Everything after that requires decision making, and that's where the Lakers haven't excelled, when the path isn't brightly lit for them, and it is not brightly lit in this situation.
Again, there could be, like I said, if they treat this the way they should, there could be potentially an upside to it not being as brightly lit, because it might force them to break some of their habits and some of their general mindset for this coaching search. But it's going to be tough because, again, part of the reason there may be no obvious choice is because there is no obvious choice.
And you
have to make one.
I want to ask you, we haven't talked about this yet. There are essentially 3 tiers of guys that they could look at. The retreads, it's a really rude thing to, kind of a mean way of phrasing just guy who's been fired before, which is basically all of them. The only reason you've never been fired is because you've never been hired, unless you're Eric Spoelstra. Or the first-time head coaches, or the JJ Redick, Rajon Rondos of the world, first-time coaches of like anyone. So how would you approach that? We'll talk that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by DoorDash. Mother's Day is fast approaching, and it is important to make your mother or the mother of your children, a mother figure in your life, smile, because moms, they're a gift and they deserve gifts because of that. So how about some flowers or another nice surprise delivered the very same day with DoorDash? You could surprise her with anything from long stem roses to chocolate or the latest techie gadget that she's really into. Or this is my advice, don't go for clever points, like cut out the guesswork. Just say, what do you want? And then order that, because you know it will make her happy. But no matter what your strategy is, all of these gifts, they can arrive at your door via DoorDash. Shop with savings that would make her proud. With a DoorDash membership, you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from DoorDash merchants that meet the minimum subtotal, with other fees, including the service fee, applying. Terms apply. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 plus on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order, now using the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply.
You can basically put guys into three tiers. People who have had jobs before. There is a championship coach out there in Mike Budenholzer. And, you know, then there's Terry Stotts, Kenny Atkinson, who at one point was very highly regarded when he with Brooklyn. And then you have David Adelman,
Micah Nori,
assistants who are, you know, Sam
Cassell.
Yeah. Guys who fit into this category of very well regarded assistants who are, you know, at some point going to be head coaches, i.e. Darvin Ham. And then you have a very intriguing category of people led by JJ Redick, LeBron's podcast partner, who, you know, JJ interviewed for, was it the Orlando job?
I think it was Charlotte.
Charlotte. Thank you. Mercifully for him, didn't get it. Otherwise, you wouldn't let him on our staff. Because no Charlottes allowed. But, you know, again, very well regarded basketball mind, and, you know, people can tell just from this podcast, the dude knows what he's talking about when it comes to, you know, what's happening on the floor. There are positives and negatives, so you can come up with all of these things. Where do you have an opinion on? I'm inclined to say no to this type of coach. I would prefer a guy with experience, you know, because the perception is, at least a little bit, the Lakers would be a little bit gun shy to hire another first-time head coach in any form based on what happened with Darvin.
Unless it happens to be the one guy, JJ Redick, who's never coached at all because of the relationship with LeBron. Speaking of the
and also despite the fact, by the way, that the better of Darvin's seasons was his first one when he theoretically had less experience.
Yeah, and that is true. That is absolutely true. You know, I mean, look, and it's weird. Like, who knows? Maybe if Darvin had been retained for a third year and everybody did the mediating session that I talked about before, maybe this stuff could have been worked through. I don't think it was worth trying to figure it out.
I think he'll get another job. Do you?
I think he'll get it. There have been coaches who did far worse than Darvin Ham who got second opportunities. Right. I mean,
I don't think it'll even take necessarily that. I don't think it'll be next season, but I think it'll be. I think within 3 or 4 years he'll be rehired.
Darvin's coached 2 seasons. He made the playoffs both years. Mm-hmm. That alone will give him another opportunity. I absolutely believe that. Plus, accurately or not, there seems to be an outside perspective that Darvin is getting just wholly scapegoated for this. So that will, whether you agree with it or not, I think that's going to help Darvin. And I think he's somebody that's built up a lot of goodwill around the league for decades. For what it's worth, he's always seemed like a really solid person. Mm-hmm. So I think all that stuff's going to help. It was interesting when we were talking before about JJ Redick and that relationship with LeBron. Given the amount of buy-in that is going to be required from LeBron and Anthony Davis to make this thing work quickly, unconventional as it may be. I think it could be worth having those guys there for the interview, like in certain respects, or at the very least, like the second interview, because you got to make this thing work in a hurry. And if for whatever reason LeBron or AD don't vibe with candidate X during the interview, even if they're off base, you might as well just cut to the chase and not hire that guy and just figure it out right away.
Certainly don't make the mistake that you did with Ty, where you're like, well, we don't want to be perceived as having like be beholden to LeBron's guy. And you're like, no, hire LeBron's guy.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think they should hire the guy LeBron wants purely because that's who LeBron wants, even if they don't think that guy's a good idea. I think that is actually a bad way to go about doing this.
It's a coaching hire. It's a coaching equivalent of the Russ trade.
Well, I mean, just the personal, like the idea of somebody's personal coach, particularly for a guy that LeBron, trust me, is going to retire at some point. So that, to me, is a bad idea. But that notwithstanding, I mean, Budenholzer, for example, I think that is going to be a very difficult sell to the fans. The idea of bringing in the guy that taught Darvin everything, fair or not, I think you could be putting Budenholzer in a situation very similar to Mike D'Antoni when he took the job that otherwise would be a perfect fit. Mike D'Antoni coaching Steve Nash. Kobe grew up idolizing Mike D'Antoni, but it had been framed as a choice between D'Antoni and Phil Jackson. D'Antoni's never going to win that. I think Budenholzer.
What if you frame? But you could frame it now where it's a choice between Budenholzer and Phil Jackson, and I think Bud would win this one.
I thought you were going to say a choice between Budenholzer and Mike D'Antoni. That one, I think Bud would definitely win.
Do you really think fans would choose Phil still now today over Budenholzer?
Over the guy who taught Darvin Ham? Yeah, I do. Yes.
We have to make a poll. We should put that on a poll because I think you're wrong. I think fans would vote. I think at least our 24,000 subscribers would vote for Budenholzer. There's no way people want Phil Jackson to come back. He's like,
I didn't say they want. Old. I didn't say that they want Phil to come back. This is very similar to our upcoming election. You have two choices, and there's going to be a lot of people.
Binary choice.
There's going to be a lot of people voting, in November who don't particularly like either of their choices.
That's
I didn't say fans are clamoring for Phil. I said if you pose it as Phil Jackson or the guy who taught Darvin Ham everything he knows, I think Phil's going to win.
I mean, it's possible. We are putting that on a poll.
Sure,
we're putting that on a poll, and I think Budenholzer will win.
Well, you know what? He probably should win. I'm just saying I'm not confident that he will.
Probably win. He absolutely should win.
Well, regardless, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this. I am intrigued a lot by some of the assistants because of their particular backgrounds. Like David Adelman and Mike Inori have both spent time with Denver, meaning they have spent a lot of time around the team that you have to figure out how to beat. So they may have some insights on how you go about beating what seems to be the biggest threat to you ever getting to the second round at the very least. Mike Inori in particular has, he's now an assistant with the Wolves. I believe he's the top assistant. He has spent a lot of time working with teams built around a lot of big men or front courts. So that to me is intriguing. Both guys are pretty young. David Adelman's father, Rick Adelman, a hell of a coach, Hall of Famer. It's a pretty good. You've spent a lot of time watching good coaching. Plus, it would be kind of hilarious to bring in the son of the coach that the Lakers kept eliminating for years and years and years. That's
what if he's trying to get hired by the Lakers just to sabotage them from the inside?
It's a long-standing revenge.
It is. It's a
on behalf of his father.
Yes.
I admire the gumption. But like those two guys I find very interesting. I mean, I think the way this thing with Darvin went so sideways so quickly is going to make it maybe even complicated for a guy like Charles Lee, an assistant in Boston who spent several years as part of that Bud tree. Fair or not, even wise or not, I think that could make this complicated selling it to the fans. And I do think selling it to the fans, it shouldn't be your only thing, but it's going to matter.
It does. It doesn't matter as much as selling it to your stars.
Absolutely.
Experience to me is an interesting one. I will say this. The category I'm most skeptical about is the guy who has never coached anything, which would be the Redick hire, essentially, because I don't think they're really going to hire Rondo. But like Redick is going to get an interview. And that
they should podcast it.
They should. I mean,
I said have LeBron in there for the interviews anyway.
Everything they do should be podcasting. So I mean, we'll quit here, but like I want to talk about experience, because I think experience, we see it in the playoffs. Experience is treated like it's this thing that is always good. And it's not. It can be very valuable, but it's not always good because people don't always learn the right lesson from the experiences that they have. And so we'll quit here, but like I'm curious what people think in terms of their tiers. Like, leave the comments, leave all that stuff on the page. Like, are you concerned about going back to another first-time head coach? Are you that much more concerned about somebody who's never coached anything before? Or are you willing to take the upside to get something that's probably a little more exciting than Terry Stotts or Scott Brooks? Don't disrespect to those guys who have been successful coaches. So we'll pick it up here tomorrow. Some other stuff about the players in the first round and where the Lakers shook out relative to the rest of the league that were really interesting. ESPN did a ranking on that. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show, hang out with over 24,000 voting members of this page, as we just described. And we'll see everybody tomorrow.